The pool war. David Parker had always prided himself on being a good neighbor. When he moved into his quiet suburban home 5 years ago, he made an effort to introduce himself to everyone on his street. He hosted backyard barbecues, helped shovel snow from the driveways in winter, and even let the kids in the neighborhood use his backyard pool occasionally during the hot summer months. At first, it was just a few kids splashing around while their parents watched from the sidelines, making friendly conversation with David. It felt good to be part of a close-knit community. But then, things started to change. The beginning of the trouble, what started as occasional, polite requests to use the pool turned into an expectation. His next-door neighbor, Linda, would send her 3 kids over almost every afternoon without even asking. The Johnsons from 2 houses down started bringing their entire extended family on weekends. One Saturday, David came home from running errands to find a group of teenagers he didn't even recognize jumping off his diving board. His backyard had become the neighborhood's free water park. David tried to set some boundaries. He put up a sign that said, "Private pool. Ask for permission before entering." But that didn't seem to stop them. One of his neighbors, Greg, just laughed and said, "Oh, come on, Dave. We all know you're the generous type." The problem escalated when David started waking up to find his pool filled with floats, soda cans, and even a few pieces of clothing left behind from late-night swims he hadn't authorized. His water bill skyrocketed. The noise was constant. His once private backyard was no longer his own. The last straw, one Friday evening, after a long and exhausting week at work, David decided to take a peaceful swim. He walked out to his backyard, expecting to enjoy a quiet moment in his own pool, only to find a full-blown pool party in progress. Loud music blasted from a speaker. Linda was lounging on one of his chairs with a drink in hand. The Johnsons had set up a grill in his yard. Greg was in his pool, laughing with his teenage son, while a few other neighbors sat around like they owned the place. David had had enough. "Everyone out!" he bellowed, his voice booming over the music. The entire group turned to look at him. Some had the audacity to look annoyed, as if he was the one being rude. "David, come on, it's just a little get-together," Greg said, smirking. "An MY pool? Without MY permission?" David snapped. "This is trespassing. I want every single one of you out of here now." Some of them started grumbling, but they gathered their things and left, though not before Linda muttered, "Geez, no need to be such a jerk about it." That was it. David wasn't going to let this continue. The revenge plan. The very next morning, he took action. First, he installed a massive fence, 8 feet tall, topped with spikes, with a double-locked gate. Then he put up security cameras pointing directly at the pool. And, as the final touch, he bought a giant "No trespassing" sign and added a line beneath it. "Violators will be prosecuted." The message was clear. His pool was off-limits. The aftermath. At first, the neighbors were furious. Linda huffed that David was being antisocial. The Johnsons spread rumors that he had changed and was becoming a recluse. Greg tried to guilt-trip him, saying, "Man, it was just a pool. It's not like we were hurting anyone." But David stood firm. He refused to give in. And slowly, the message sank in. One evening, he sat on his back porch, sipping a cold beer, listening to the beautiful sound of silence. No loud music. No uninvited guests. No mess to clean up. For the first time in years, his backyard was his own again. And he had never been happier. The retaliation. David thought his troubles were over once he secured his pool, but he had underestimated just how entitled his neighbors had become. The very next week, the retaliation began. It started with petty things. His trash bins were mysteriously knocked over one morning. The mail he usually received like clockwork suddenly went missing. Someone left a nasty note on his car windshield that read, "Selfish people don't belong in this neighborhood." Then, things escalated. One night, David was woken up by the sound of splashing. His heart pounded as he checked his security cameras, and sure enough, a few teenagers had climbed the fence and were having a secret late-night swim. David grabbed his flashlight and stormed outside. "Get out of my pool," he roared. The kids screamed and scrambled out, dripping wet, tripping over themselves as they tried to escape. One of them, Greg's son, had the nerve to yell, "You're ruining the fun for everyone, old man." before hopping the fence and running off. David was fuming. He wasn't about to let this go unanswered. David's ultimate move was enough. David called the police the next day to report trespassing. Since he had security footage, the officer assured him they would have a word with the parents of the kids involved. But that wasn't all. David decided to drain the pool completely. If they wanted to break in, they'd be met with nothing but an empty concrete hole. A few days later, Greg stormed up to David's doorstep. "What the hell, David?" he snapped. "My son told me you got him in trouble with the cops over some harmless fun. Now you've drained the pool? What is wrong with you?" David crossed his arms. "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? Your kid broke into my property. You should be apologizing, not yelling at me." Greg scoffed. "We were just being neighborly, man. You used to be cool. Now you're acting like some kind of paranoid hermit." David smirked. "Call it whatever you want. But my pool, my rules. And since you people don't respect boundaries, I decided to take away the temptation." Greg stormed off, cursing under his breath. The final showdown. For a while, things were tense. Some of the neighbors refused to speak to David. Others gave him dirty looks whenever he walked by. Linda even started hosting her own pool days at her house, just to prove that David's pool wasn't the only fun spot in town. David didn't care. He enjoyed his peace. But he knew the neighborhood hadn't forgiven him. Then came the breaking point. One weekend, while David was away visiting family, someone broke into his yard and filled his empty pool with filthy, murky water, mixed with garbage, dead leaves, and God knows what else. When David returned, he found his once pristine pool turned into a disgusting swamp. His security cameras had been disabled. There were no clear suspects, but he had a pretty good idea who was responsible. That was the last straw. David filed an official complaint with the Homeowners Association, hired a lawyer, and started talking to the city about installing a second, even higher fence, one with barbed wire at the top. Then, to everyone's shock, he sold his house. The shocking twist: the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. "David finally had enough," Linda muttered at one of her gatherings. "I mean, what did he expect?" Greg sneered. "You can't just cut yourself off from the whole community." But they all got the shock of their lives when they met the new owner of David's house. A wealthy businessman bought the property and turned the entire backyard into a private guest house. No more pool. The new owner was even stricter than David. No loud parties. No loitering near the property. No more free-for-all summer days. The neighbors had pushed David out, thinking they could reclaim their unofficial, public pool. But instead, they ended up with a permanent fortress next door. And David? He moved to a secluded house by the lake, where he enjoyed swimming in peace, without a single unwanted guest. The neighbors never found out, but David laughed every time he thought about their reaction. They had taken him for granted. They had lost a friendly, generous neighbor. And in the end, they had only themselves to blame. The grand finale: David sat on the deck of his new lakefront home, the cool breeze ruffling his hair as he sipped his coffee. It had been a full year since he left the nightmare of his old neighborhood behind, and he had never felt better. No more uninvited guests. No more entitled neighbors. No more pool drama. But one day, while scrolling through the local news out of curiosity, something caught his eye. Neighborhood feud escalates as former pool becomes a battleground. David chuckled and clicked on the article. Apparently, after he sold his house, the new owner, Mr. Whitmore, a strict businessman, had taken things to a whole new level. He installed motion sensors, high-tech security cameras, and a 24/7 guard dog in the backyard. The Johnsons had tried to send their kids over for a friendly visit and got a blaring alarm instead. Linda, still bitter over losing her free pool access, had tried to rally the neighborhood against Whitmore, but the man didn't care. Then came the best part. Greg, the loudest complainer, had been caught trying to sneak into the yard with his teenage son. They thought the pool might still be there, only to trip the security system and get recorded on camera. Whitmore pressed charges. David burst out laughing. These were the same people who had tormented him, treated his generosity like a right, and even vandalized his yard. And now, they were getting exactly what they deserved. David's victory lap later that week, he drove past his old neighborhood, just for fun. The place looked different. The once bustling street felt quieter, colder. The fences were taller. The once friendly neighbors now avoided each other. The pool that had once united them was long gone, and so was their sense of community. David didn't stop. He just kept driving, a smug smile on his face. He had one. And this time, no one would ever take his peace away again.